Okay, so for the part 2 of our week 1 presentation, this will be our topic, no? Spatial data and representation. It has only 4 slides, but to give you more idea on on what is JS and how it works, I will show you. I will be adding videos for you to watch. Okay. For the meantime, let us study the 4 slides of week 1, episode 2. Okay. So the outline is the spatial data types, the vector and the raster data, and its applications and suitability. So again, spatial data, it is the information that identifies the geographic location of an area, no? Sa sa palengke, sa mall, sa school, no? Those are the spatial data. And the geographic information itself, our emerging technology, a system designed to capture, store or manipulate, analyze, and manage and present spatial or geographic data. So we have two types of spatial data, the vector data and the raster data. So ano ba ang vector? Ang vector data, it represents spatial data using points, lines, and polygons. No? It defines discrete objects and relationships. For example, no? Uh, yung Wesleyan University, Philippines. With the use of vector data, yung point, no? Ipo-point natin sa mapa yung location ng Wesleyan University, Philippines. Or using vector data, yung point, ipo-point natin yung Cabanatuan City Terminal, di ba? Using vector data again, ipo-point natin kung saan ba ang Walter Mart, kung saan ba ang SM Mega Mall, kung saan ba ang Cabanatuan City Terminal, no? That is one vector data, yung point. Remember that, yung point, ipino-point natin yung location, either the landmark, no? That is vector data. Number two is the line. Number two is the line under the vector data, no? So the line, no, it is geographic entity connecting points representing linear features. Again, under the vector data, meron tayong lines. Yung lines na to, it represents a linear features. For example, road. Yan, di ba? Pag gumawa tayo ng kalsada, gagawa tayo ng line. Ha? Either kung anong klase mang line niya, kung straight, a curve, or sharp curve. No? Basically, lines represents roads or road network. Lines represents creeks, rivers. So aside from that, lines represents for example utilities, electricity or electrical utilities, kung saan ba tumawid yung linya ng kuryente. Also, using line, pwede mong i-plot kung saan ba dumaan yung pipe ng tubig, kung saan ba dumaan yung linya ng tubig, kung saan ba tumawid yung linya ng tubig. Or saan ba yung dumaan yung alternate route, saan ba dumaan yung mga vehicles, no? So that's line, no? So we have two, no? Pangatlo is the polygon, a geographic entity defined by a series of interconnected points forming enclosed areas. So, polygon, ibig sabihin lang ito, is gumagawa ka ng area, enclosed area. Okay? So, for example, uh, gagawa ka ng polygon ng lote ng bahay ninyo, no? So, gagawa ka ng square. So, yun ang polygon. Enclosed area. Pwede siyang square, pwede siyang tawag dito, oblong, pwede siyang kahit anong shape. Pwedeng star. Depende kung anong klaseng polygon ang gusto mong i-plot sa mapa. For example, yung area ng Wesleyan University, Philippines. No? Hindi lang naman rectangle yun. No? And yung area ng Cabanatuan City, hindi naman basta nagbilog ka lang, yun na ang area ng Cabanatuan. Hindi. When we say polygon, you perform interconnected points forming enclosed areas. So, sa ating sa ating lab, ipapakita namin sa inyo kung ano ba yung mga vector data na yan. So, we have three vector data: the points, the lines, and the polygons. Make sure to note that, no? Hindi ko nilalagay dito yung iba't ibang sinasabi ko para mag-note kayo, no? Para hindi lang kayo nagpipicture-picture dito sa aking slides. Anyway, to continue, we have the raster data. When we say raster data, you have the grid-based representation. Sabihin nito, yung representation mo ng mapa is in a square or pixel representation, no? Grid-based, no? Basically, pinagpatong-patong na square images yan. So, that's the grid-based representation. We also have here the pixel values. No? These are numeric values assigned to each pixel in a raster dataset representing a specific attribute or characteristic. So basically, these pixel values are images, no, that have, for example, the tawag dito, the DEM models. No? Pag ginamit mo yung raster na DEM, meron ng iba't ibang features yon na kasama, or meron iba't ibang attribute na kasama. Yung elevation ng for example ng mountain, no, kung gaano ba kataas yon. So that's raster data. So again, we have the two spatial data types, the vector and the raster. Under the vector, meron tayong points, lines, and polygons. Under the raster data, we have the grid-based representation and the pixel-based values. So in comparison, no, uh, uh, meron tayong iba't ibang gamit kasi ng vector and raster. So we can identify or differentiate it sa ating laboratory. Okay? So to continue, we have here the various applications of GIS, no, and spatial data types. So, urban planning, na-discuss na natin, agriculture, disaster management. For example, land cover classification. When it comes to land cover classification, no, with the use of the spatial data types, for example, yung vector and raster, you can easily delineate or you can easily subdivide and classify land parcels. For example, meron kang mapa. With the use of the data type vector data polygon, no, madidelineate mo na kung hanggang saan ba yung lote mo. No? Kasi when you say polygon, enclosed area, syempre yung mabubuo mong shape, yun ang iyong, for example, lote. Or for example, you delineate your agricultural land, no? For example, gumawa ka ng area wherein kukunin mo yung mga mohon, no? Yung mga boundaries ng iyong agricultural land. So that's how polygon is being used, no? The vector data is being used in land cover classification. I-remember, iba ang polygon sa line, no? Pag polygon, enclosed area. Pag line, it's not enclosed, no? Basically, pag line, ito ay ginagamit sa mga roads and rivers, no? So land cover, doon ang gamit ng polygon. Next is the natural resource management. When we say natural resource management, dito naman natin na ipa-plot, no, or na monitor yung pag-manage natin ng mga natural resources natin. For example, meron kang forest area with the use of the raster data, makikita mo iba yung kulay ng forest area sa area na walang forest, 'di ba? Kasi yung sinasabi natin yung raster data is image 'di ba? Imagery. So, pag na-plot mo yung raster data and makita mo dun yung greener sa hindi green, you can easily enclose or plot using polygon yung forest or natural resources area, no? So pinagsama mo doon, 'di ba, yung raster and yung vector data sa natural resource management. When it comes to remote sensing naman, no, satellite imagery and spatial data applications, for example, yung sa example natin kanya sa natural resource management, no, yung satellite imagery, ipinlat natin sa GIS, okay, at ginamitan natin ng vector data na identify tuloy natin kung hanggang saan yung area ng forest. Sa remote sensing, ginagamit yan sa pagkuha ng satellite image, sa pagkuha ng mga elevation models. Yan ang gamit ng remote sensing. Okay? When we say climate studies naman, no, sa vector and raster, it employs spatial data for studying and understanding climate patterns. Now, for example, sa mga weather forecast, di ba? They use maps and predictions using GIS kung saan ba dadaan yung bagyo and gaano ba kalakas yung bagyo, yung lakas na yan, gaano ba kaluwang or kalawak yung scope or yung sakop ng kanyang damage. For example, 1 kilometer from the center. Kung nasa kabanatuan yung center, pag pinlat mo sa map, hanggang saan ba yung 1 kilometer na scope ng bagyo from the center. So sa mga ganung bagay, nagagamit natin ng GIS to predict and have projections kung gaano kalakas yung bagyo, kung saan ba siya pupunta. Yan. Kung gaano ba siya katagal yung movement niya, yung speed niya. So that's how where we apply GIS in climate studies. And in wildlife, spatial data spatial data used in tracking animal migrations, utilizing spatial data to track and understand animal movements. So, when it comes to wildlife conservation, alam naman natin yung ibang for example, mga birds, no, is they travel from time to time depende sa climate ng isang lugar. Ngayon, if someone goes extinct, and alam natin kung saan ba sila pumupunta and alam natin kung ano ba ang meron doon sa pinupuntahan nila, sa part natin as a wildlife conservationist, alam ngayon natin ang gagawin natin to track their movements para nang sa ganun, hindi maiwasan natin yung kanilang extinction. Okay, so that's wildlife conservation. And the urban growth development, like urban planning, ginagamit siya to predict and model ng urban growth. Kasi sa isang mapa, nandun naman yung number of populations, di ba? Number of migrants from this year to this year. Now with that, with the data that has stored in the GIS, we can now predict the growth of population, the growth of economy, no? And how fast or how slow the the growth of the urban area will be, no? So that's how urban growth modeling is uh, uh, benefited from GIS. Okay, so that ends our 4 slides of GIS. Now let us proceed with the video presentation. Okay.
So, I'm sure everyone here knows about the war going on between Russia and Ukraine. Now, here, I have a blank map of the world, and I'd like you to raise your hand if you're 100% confident that you can find Ukraine on this map. Okay, not bad. If you can't, don't worry, because you're not alone. Only 1 in 3 American voters can. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, we're not directly involved in this war, so what's the big deal with not knowing where Ukraine is? Well, the numbers have shown that even in countries in which we've had active military involvement, we still had trouble locating them. In 2002, at the beginning of the US conflict in Afghanistan, only 17% of young Americans could find it on a map. What does this mean? What does it mean when we, as citizens of the most powerful country in the world, cannot identify where major global conflicts are taking place, including those in which we're actively involved in? Here's what it means. When we don't know where Ukraine or Afghanistan is, we lack the key geographic knowledge needed to make informed decisions. So let me illustrate this. A look at a map tells us that Afghanistan lies at this crossroads between Central, South, and West Asia, which means that it has always been at the middle of conflicts between the great powers of the continent. And knowing about its mountainous terrain gives us insight into the politically fragmented nature of the country. Afghanistan's terrain has actually culturally divided the country, which means that ethnic groups like the Pashtun, the largest in the country, are actually made up of many smaller tribes and groups and people of differing cultural values. And in an attempt to work with the Pashtun to establish order in Afghanistan, the US treated them as a singular monolith. But this didn't really work. In addition to this, the mountainous terrain is never advantageous to the attacker, and this definitely contributed to the length and costliness of the US involvement in Afghanistan. Now, let's go back to Ukraine. Voters that know where Ukraine is are more likely to understand its strategic location on the Black Sea as a buffer between Central Europe and Russia. These voters, by double-digit margins, are more likely to back assertive sanctions and measures by the United States towards Russia. And we all know that the war has caused gas prices to rise sharply. But did you know that in developing countries like Egypt, which depend heavily on wheat and grain exports from the Black Sea, there's been a bread crisis? It's become very difficult for people to buy, and yet it's a staple food for everyone in these nations. So understanding Ukraine's geography allows us to explain this. Because Ukraine is rich in one of the most fertile types of soil in the world, called Chernozem. This, along with its relatively flat terrain and location on the Black Sea, has allowed it to become one of the leading exporters of wheat in the world. But the Russian invasion has halted production of this wheat, as well as exports from key Black Sea ports such as Mariupol and Odessa, which are now destroyed from the war. So as consumers, geographic knowledge allows us to better understand where goods come from, enabling us to make more informed purchases. Now, let's go back in time a bit. Most geographers agree that had we been better educated about Southeast Asia and Vietnam, we would have likely taken a different course of action during the Vietnam War, which basically means we probably would have pulled out earlier. I'm sure some of you here are familiar with the name Robert McNamara. He was the Secretary of Defense during the time of the war, and in his 1995 memoir, he would go on to list several major causes for disaster. Most notably, and I quote, "Our profound ignorance of the history, culture, and politics of the people of the area. We underestimated the power of nationalism to motivate people. Interestingly enough, just last week, US intelligence officials were questioned for misjudging the governments of Ukraine and Afghanistan, as some believed that Ukraine would fall to Russia in a matter of weeks, and that the US-backed government in Afghanistan could last for months. We completely misjudged the geopolitics of the situation in Vietnam, and we continue to do so in many parts of the world today. Consider how costly not knowing more about a place is. Consider the amount of money spent and the number of lives lost. But the applications of geography extend far beyond the realm of geopolitics, and are also applicable to things like global health. Geography has been crucial in understanding the COVID-19 pandemic, and with geography, we can explain almost every aspect of it, from the spread of the disease to the vaccine distribution or the worldwide economic effects. For example, why did Iran, out of all the countries in the world, have a large outbreak at the beginning of the pandemic? There's many factors, but we can actually trace this back to a single city, the site of Iran's first case. This city is called Qom, and Qom isn't the largest city in Iran, nor is it the most densely populated. But Qom is important because it's a major pilgrimage site for Shias, and introduction of COVID to the Middle East happened to coincide with Nowruz, the Iranian New Year. So increased travel to this city allowed the virus to spread quickly and to all parts of Iran, and understanding what creates hotspots like these is crucial for saving lives. This example, in particular, illustrates why religious and political authorities need to work closer together during times of pandemic. It's really a paradox that in a time where global events shape our lives more than ever, we are the least educated in geography. You see, geography isn't simply this rote memorization of capitals or places on a map, as much as I may find that entertaining. Geography is about making global connections, piecing together different disciplines and knowledge about places, so that we can better understand the events that take place in our world to make more informed decisions. Prominent geographer Arm de Blay put it simply, geography is synthesis. Geography's ability to connect the seemingly different is crucial for one of the greatest challenges of the 21st century: climate change. Now, we all know about climate change, but why are there still so many people who refuse to believe it? Or maybe even worse, not do anything about it? Now, I think there's lots of reasons, but a lot of this has to do with a lack of basic geographic knowledge. It's really hard to grasp the danger our planet is in when we don't know a lot about it in the first place. Our world is shaped by a web of intricate processes, like atmospheric phenomena or oceanic circulation. And we really need to get to know how our planet works if we want to understand the challenges it faces, as well as the possible solutions. And geography opens up our eyes to the circumstances of places unfamiliar to us. And in learning about the places that are already grappling with the worst effects of climate change, we become more motivated to ensure that the same doesn't happen to us. Knowing about disasters like the drying up of the Aral Sea in Central Asia or the disappearance of glaciers in Bolivia is essential if we want to avoid similar mistakes in the future. In the end, geography allows us to be better global citizens. We need classes specifically dedicated to geography, not classes where our focus is on things like memorization or world capitals, but classes where students are taught how to connect the dots and make sense out of our complicated world so that they too can make informed decisions. And in universities where geography majors are all but a thing of the past, They should at least require students to take a couple basic classes in physical and human geography. But geography isn't just about saving the world from nuclear disaster or fighting climate change, because it also connects us as humans. Geographic knowledge can enrich our personal lives and our relationships, making us better people. Because when we learn about places, we also learn about the people there. So geography lends itself to cultural understanding. The more we learn about others, the more open-minded we become. And perhaps, if we were more knowledgeable and appreciative about other cultures, we would be less inclined to create conflict with those different from us. Thank you.